Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Rundown. My name is Nick Suter. With me today is Commander Lance McMillan. The Kakhovka Dam has been destroyed. We've discussed this dam quite a bit over a year. There was a point at which it was mined, and it's always been an extraordinarily important topic of discussion because it is so important to Ukraine. It provides water to Crimea and much of the towns in the area. The dam also provides water to the 𝐍𝐢𝐜𝐴 nuclear power plant. Without water for cooling, we could have a pretty significant nuclear crisis on our hands. It provides electricity, and it is a key part of the the agricultural, it's necessary for the agriculture in the area. Not to mention, if it were to flood, we would see or if it were to be utterly destroyed, we would see a huge amount of water flooding downstream. Now, the fact that this dam could be destroyed at any time has been held over the Ukrainians for some time. As of last night, the dam was, quote, destroyed. We're going to talk about what exactly that means and what the consequences of that are. And with me tonight to discuss that is Commander Lance McMillan. Commander, how are you?
I'm doing great. Yeah, this is a pretty significant little catastrophe.
And catastrophe is, in fact, how people are referring to it. Why has this dam been so important up until now?
It's a number of things. I think perhaps most imminent as a problem for everybody, as opposed to just the folks in the region, is the fact that the water that comes from this reservoir is what is used to provide cooling water for the nuclear power plant that you mentioned. Without that cooling water, there is a not insignificant chance that the reactor may have a significant problem, causing a Chernobyl-like meltdown or something along those levels, release of all sorts of contaminants into the air, and that isn't air currents moving that will take that kind of waste everywhere, and it becomes a world problem.
So let's talk about that for a minute. So this could potentially affect basically every living, breathing human being. The 𝐍𝐢𝐜𝐴 power plant has a pool that has been fed by the dam. The dam has to be, the water on the other side of the dam has to be full. Those water levels then go into the pool. That pool has 30 days worth of cooling water, and if that pool is not resupplied, then all we've got left is what's in that pool. So my understanding is essentially once the water level on the dam drops, you've got about 30 days of water for cooling for that power plant, which even decommissioned still needs to cool the waste products and fuel in the plant. Is that roughly accurate?
Right. Yeah, a lot of people don't understand that when you scram a reactor like that, it still requires cooling. Just pulling the rods doesn't end the fact that it's generating enormous amounts of heat. So that problem persists for a considerable period afterwards.
Downstream of this dam, we now have 40,000 people who are in the evacuation zone, but 25,000 of that 40,000 is in Russian-controlled territory. So Russia has controlled both the dam and a significant portion of that territory. It appears as if Russia is making no efforts to move the people in that flood zone. How much flooding are we talking about?
Well, initially, and I'm talking months, maybe even close to a year ago, speculation was that if this dam were all of a sudden to be destroyed, you would end up with this mini tsunami about 15 feet tall that would just go sweeping down the river course, demolishing everything in its path, including significant portions of the large city of Kherson. What's happened here, and I know that the pictures you're showing are make it look like it's enormous, but it's nowhere near as enormous as it could have been. I doubt this is by design on the part of the Russian demolition engineers. I think it's more likely, given the ineptitude we've seen from them in the past, a case of them botching it. But regardless, the effect of the demolition is that we're just having a fairly rapid rise in the river, giving time for people to evacuate. But it's still a major issue. As you note, the people who are being evacuated are predominantly on the southern bank or the Russian-controlled bank of the river. I should note, equally importantly, the nuclear reactor is on the southern bank of the river. So it's, I don't think, in danger necessarily of being flooded out, but it's in Russian-controlled area. So the immediate effects of any problem with the plant are going to be felt predominantly in the Russian region, especially because that's the direction the prevailing wind is going. So that's what's going on there. Another thing that's important to note here is that the pictures won't give you a clear view of this, but further downstream, the northern or Ukrainian side bank is actually higher ground than the southern or Russian-controlled area. Prior to the dam being built in the mid-1950s, a lot of the southern portion of that was actually marshland because it was constantly seeing, rising and falling according to rainfall and such. This is a major, major river. As you can see from the photos they're showing, it's close to a mile wide at this point. So it's very significant amount of water.
So we had, and this is something that we had talked about before, the 15-foot wall of water if the dam were destroyed. Now,
right.
The dam, they're saying that the dam has been destroyed, and I think you make an excellent point.
Yeah.
What we're seeing here is the most recent footage that we have, and it looks like the hole has gotten bigger. But when we had said destroyed, we really meant like the entire dam gone. And
right. Really, I think when people were talking about the 15-foot tsunami, it was the bridge, snap your fingers, disappears. That's not what happened. What we had was 3 sections of the dam were breached and water began to flow out. And I think what has happened is the 2 northernmost sections, the area between the 2 holes, has also now collapsed. And so right there where you see the eddy in the middle between those 2, that part probably was actually 2 separate holes originally. So
yes, please.
Go ahead.
Well, so that's one reason why we have not seen the catastrophic loss of life. People have had a greater amount of time to get warning and evacuate. We do have pictures. If you go to our Discord, we have many more pictures of what you see in the towns. We also know that, for example, one zoo downstream of this, everything except for aquatic life, geese, swans, and so on and so forth, over 300 animals have drowned. It's the water levels have already reached that point, and they're continuing to get higher. So all of that will be on our Discord. Come on in and join us, and we have a lot more there. So you had said the Russians had positions. One of the things that I've heard about is some of the Russian trenches that they had developed for defense have, of course, been flooded.
Well, as I said, the low ground is on their side of the river. So the moment this occurred, they basically flooded all of their defensive positions, probably within about 2 to 3 miles of the river. So they've had to pull way back to higher ground. One wonders whether they alerted their troops before this, or whether some of them got caught in their bunkers when they flooded. So it's hard to say.
Well, that may also have been presumed. I mean, who knows? It's impossible. They don't seem to care too much about their own troops. But if they did this piecemeal and damaged a huge section of the dam first before it collapsed, it would give their own troops also time to leave. Given that, why would Russia blow the dam at this point?
Well, first we need to say that the Russians or the Russian. Let me rephrase this. The mayor of the Russian-controlled side of the river, of that oblast, mayor, governor, I don't know what the proper term would be, has claimed it was a terrorist act by the Ukrainians that blew it up. It was not the Russians who blew it up. I think the evidence is overwhelming that it's not that the case. The Russians have had this thing wired to blow for a long, long time now. Yeah. So why would they do it? Well, a river that's a mile wide is an incredible problem to conduct an assault across. And if you speculate that one of the things the Ukrainians were planning to doing was drive on and take Crimea, well, their problem of trying to cross a mile wide river now is expanded to trying to cross a potentially 2 to 3 mile wide river. So from that perspective, it makes a tiny bit of tactical sense to have done it, but I don't think that's why it was done. I think it was done just because they're frustrated, they're scared, they're feeling impotent. My guess, and this is just pure supposition on my part, there's no evidence to support it, but my guess is the order to do this came directly from the highest level. And it would not surprise me in the least if his generals and advisors all said, "Are you nuts? Don't do it." But we're not allowed to criticize the great leader. So they went and did what they were told to do.
This dam also provided water to Crimea, which has its own separate stores of water, but we believe no more than, say, about 30 days. So is that water supply now dramatically reduced and or cut off? So and if so, that would be the question.
If this is gone, then the aqueduct, canal, whatever you want to call it, that supplies water to Crimea is no longer going to really be able to provide that water. Now, we do know that the Russians have been stockpiling water in cisterns that they have on the peninsula, and those go way back, I mean, literally to the 1850s Crimean War with, the French and the British. Those cisterns still exist. They could fill them up and stockpile, but that only goes so far. The population has certainly grown in that period too. So the demand on that water is going to use it up. And that's complicated by the fact that if the offensive does hit in such a way that it brings Ukrainian HIMARS or the glide bomb missiles into range, then the bridge goes down too. So trying to resupply with water carrying trucks or trains or whatever becomes a problem. But who lives in Crimea? It's Ukrainians. So who cares if they all die of thirst, right?
Well, and we've discussed this before. If water can't get into Crimea, any civilians who have the water are going to lose it to the military, the Russian military, you're going to going to shoot you. So CF Beauty has gifted an In-Time Show membership. Thank you so much for that gift. We really appreciate that. That was awfully kind of you. We really appreciate the gift. I think there may have been one more, so I will go try to find that. But thank you so much, CF Beauty. We really appreciate that. So, in fact, there was one more. No, there was. Crazy Cat became a member and also gifted one In-Time Show membership. So, thank you guys very much. We really appreciate that, and it's just a great way to help and support the channel. And hopefully, I won't knock too much over in my own office. So, well, thank you for that. So, essentially, it looks like at a minimum, it's going to sow a lot of chaos in the the general region and make life a lot harder for Ukrainians, who now also have to mount some kind of rescue effort for people in this region.
Right, but let's look at from the Russian perspective. If you anticipate that a big offensive is coming and you want to buy yourself more time, sowing chaos like this, where the Ukrainian government is forced into responding to this disaster, potentially delays the launch of the offensive. I'm not trying to justify it, but I'm trying to say that may be part of the thinking that went on in why they did this when they did.
Well, and we've talked about this before. Oh, please, sorry.
Again, this highlights, I think, that feeling of impotence that the people in the Kremlin are feeling. You know, why would you carry out a colossally dangerous and desperate act like this? Because you don't see any other options. And it goes to the whole question that you hear a lot of people saying, don't present your opponent in war with a difficult decision. Present him with a dilemma. A difficult decision, he knows what he has to do, he just has to decide to do it. A dilemma means he has to choose between two equally unpalatable choices of which way to go. And it makes it all the harder for him.
So, we've talked before as well about, you know, it's unfortunately, you can make an argument for why some civilian infrastructure is a legitimate target if it's in any way whatsoever, even in an ancillary way, helping with the military, and if by destroying it you slow down your opponent's military. Now, that's not to say it's justified, but you can see how the argument can be made. So we know one other thing, which is Ukraine has been called the breadbasket of the world, or the breadbasket of Europe, and produces a lot of wheat and products that we've actually had to make deals with Russia and Ukraine together to try to allow shipments of grain to continue through this war. Is that going to be affected in any way by the loss of this dam?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm sure at least some of this water is used for agricultural purposes. And with it all now rushing down into the Black Sea, you can imagine the problems that's going to cause in terms of being able to get the water to supply the crops with what they need to grow. So, yeah, that's an issue. You know, I wanted to point something out. We were talking about how the Russian forward defenses are now basically underwater, that they've had to pull back. If you think back to, my memory's a little hazy here, but I think it was in like the September-October timeframe when the Ukrainians liberated their side of Kherson Oblast that the Russians had formerly occupied. And a lot of people were surprised that when the Russians fled back across to their side of the river, that they didn't set their forces in place in a forward defense along the river, that they were further back. If you think about it, it may be that they'd already planned on something like this, and their actual defensive line the flooding would extend. So this is certainly a premeditated move, not spur of the moment.
𝐒𝐨𝐻𝐿INSKY, you are about to engage in an offensive. The U.S. has actually said as of today that they believe that the counteroffensive has already started. We've seen some progress. We're going to be discussing that with Starsky when we have Starsky on Friday, 3 p.m. Eastern. We will have him on. You'll be on with us, and we're going to discuss what despite just a day of some increased activity, we've seen some pretty remarkable things. But 𝐒𝐨𝐻𝐿INSKY, obviously, we don't know his plan. So if his plan had been to try to get to Crimea through, and you had basically said what you believe they're going to try to do is cut off the land bridge between Crimea and the Donbass region. There are several points of attack that you said that they could go through. This, if I'm correct, eliminates really the furthest west mode of attack. So if he was planning on going through there, he's now got a very serious problem. But other than that, if he still has, say, somewhere in the middle of that land bridge was the actual going to be the general thrust of the attack, you are Zelensky. Now you've got this problem. What do you do from a military and civilian standpoint?
That's an interesting question. The forces that have been allocated to conduct an offensive are not forces that really have the kind of equipment or training that would be useful in managing a unnatural disaster. I don't know how else to express this. Yeah, and a disaster of this nature. Ukraine definitely has an equivalent of like National Guardsmen, and they have training for disaster relief and that kind of stuff. Those guys will probably be mobilized and sent to deal with this. Those troops, had they been available for supporting the offensive, would probably be doing rear area security missions, moving logistics forward, etc. So that may be somewhat impacted, but not enough to call off the offensive. So I don't know that it really has that profound an effect, would be my guess.
In your view, is this...
So what does...
Please. No,
go ahead.
please.
I was going to say, so what does Zelensky do? I think he does what he can to alleviate the suffering, but he doesn't postpone by more than a day or two the start of whatever they're going to do. I think that's probably the way they will proceed.
Does this constitute a war crime in your view?
Oh yes, absolutely.
So, and you had used the word catastrophic earlier, and I want to make it clear. So, in your view, this is catastrophic on the catastrophic level. And I say that because, by the way, I've been trying to get you to use the word game changer on stream for and you are. And by the way, I make fun of this characteristic. It's playful ribbing. It's one of the things that makes you most valuable on this show, which is you're pretty reserved about what you're willing to claim. And you certainly don't like the use of the word game changer for whatever, one of these days. I'll get the cattle prod out and just get you a little zap every time. Would you say it's a game changer?
Well, honestly, I think I did use it a fair amount early on, and then somebody made a joke about it, and I became very self-conscious about overusing the term.
Well, and I think rightly so, and so now I have this bar of trying to get you to, and I thought I came pretty close on one of our last shows, but so I imagine you don't use the word catastrophic necessarily very, I imagine you're pretty reserved about the use of that, but would this, the destroying of this dam strike you as catastrophic?
I would say this is a catastrophic event. And as I said, it's not a natural disaster. It's an unnatural disaster. It's a man-made natural disaster. And it's deliberate. The visceral sense you come away with when you see something like this is, boy, I wish they'd use HIMARS or storm shower or something, blow up some dam in Russia and flood their countryside. It's like, no, this is not the way decent people wage war. And if that's one thing this entire campaign has shown, is that one side are decent people defending their homeland and the other side are a bunch of pathological aggressors.
Orcs.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and we always
Sauron rules in Russia.
We always see in live chat, why do you call them orcs? And Starsky always says because of their behavior, they don't behave like human beings. And I think you've made another good point, which is this doesn't seem to do much either strategically or tactically for the situation in any way whatsoever. It'll have an impact, but not a huge one. It's not going to change the direction of the war, and it seems to be just this vindictive.
Yeah, it's another, as I keep overusing the word, it's an impotent gesture by a government that can no longer control the narrative of what's happening here. They're trying to find some way to continue the big, tough guy bluster that they've been pulling this entire time. Honestly, it's no different than saying, well, if you push me too far, I'll use nukes. And arguably, this is kind of, I've used nukes. They're trying to show people that they're serious, and if they don't get their way, they will push the big red button. And I don't think they understand that what they're really doing is convincing everybody that you bastards do not deserve to survive one day longer.
So we've had over a day with this, and it's a lot to process. Thank God it wasn't as bad as we had been expecting, because we've talked about this damn a lot on this show, because this has been the nightmare scenario. It's turned out, as bad as it's been, it could have been a lot worse, and it could have all just ruptured in war.
Oh, yeah.
So it didn't do that. Are there, as of yet, any long-term plans with how to deal with 𝐍𝐢𝐜𝐸𝐸, and how to deal with the water situation in Crimea, which, by the way, there are a couple of different ways you could probably deal with that, I would imagine, for the short or interim period. But the problem is you'd really need Ukraine's help working with, you'd have to get the Russians out of there. You can't get water in there unless the Russians are going to bring it through the bridge. And we talked about the problems with that. So have there been any plans that you're aware of to deal with either of those situations?
I don't sit on the Kremlin's planning commission, so I can't tell you. I'm sure that they have contingency plans, but if they're planning for something like this is anything like the way they planned the rest of this war, I think we all know how those plans are going to turn out. Ineptitude seems to be a governing trait.
I think the word Russia or Russian is going to, we talked about Clockwork Orange and the words, it uses some Russian words, and they actually mean roughly, drugs, all that other good stuff. But I think the word Russia is going to, 50 years from now, it's going to mean like an absolute clusterfuck, or just, ineptitude unimaginable. It's going to mean something different. There's no way that word is staying. Yeah. Words evolve. That one's changing, yeah. So we have
go ahead.
So $2 super chat from Sinister Porpoise. Thank you so much for your support. We really appreciate it. We're still growing, so it always helps. Thank you so much. Could this be an attempt to make a dirty bomb? So this would be to turn the 𝐍𝐢𝐜𝐸𝐸 power plant into the world's largest dirty bomb. Do you think that that's a direct goal here?
I think it may potentially be a consideration of what went on with the thinking for this. But again, the direction the winds blow pretty much mean that they're going to be blowing radioactive waste across Rostov, across Volgograd, that whole area downwind of this is just going to, and it's a very important heartland part of Russia, and it's all going to get irradiated with it. It's just like, I don't know, maybe they're hoping that by their own people contracting massive amounts of radiation sickness, that, they can appeal on the world stage and say, oh, you've got to help us, our poor people are dying.
Or that nobody's going to
send artillery ammunition to help poor Sasha.
Or that nobody's going to invade Russia because all the people are radioactive. It's like I think they're looking to stop a Ukrainian invasion. Level 70, do they care? The answer to that, I try not to opine on people's mental state, but from absolutely all of the evidence we've gleaned over well over a year, the answer is no. They don't care in the slightest. The amount of troops that they send.
If it's not an oligarch being directly affected, no. The people in the Kremlin don't give a flying fig.
So, Suzanne, $10. Thank you so much again. We're still growing. We really appreciate it. Level 70, 677 Canadian. Do you think foreign troops may enter Ukraine to help with the evacuation? If so, how would Russia respond to this?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Would foreign troops, and it read foreign troops, but let's just say, do you think that any kind of aid, whether it's, let's say, any kind of either National Guard or somebody who is at least qualified to help deal with these kind of evacuations, though they may also serve in an ancillary role as troops in other settings, would any of them be sent to Ukraine explicitly for the purpose of evacuating citizens? And if so, how would Russia respond?
I think what matters is where they come from. Mm-hmm. And this leads into another issue that came up, I think it was today, actually. I think if countries like Romania, Bulgaria, possibly Turkey, countries that adjoin the Black Sea region, maybe even some of the former Russian or Soviet republics over there, Georgia, Armenia, if they were to send, I hesitate saying military, but we'll call them military because everybody I think knows what I mean. I'm not meaning armed troops. Yeah. I mean civil defense stuff. If they were to send people in to help, there'd be less direct opposition. And in particular, that could be ameliorated to a degree because if you said, we're not just helping the ones on the Ukrainian side, we want to help people on both sides of the river, then you might have less opposition from the Russians to allowing something of that nature to happen.
If these countries such as this sent help, the help went to the Russian side. The Russian side said, no, we don't want your help, flooding notwithstanding. And let me rephrase. The Russian, the people in charge on the Russian side, not the Ukrainians themselves, but the people who are in charge of the occupied, so to speak, areas, said no, and then actually attempted to repel them with force. Could that lead to an incident, or is that something or is that even so? Is that just the possibility of that? Would that maybe cause some hesitation towards helping on the Russian side?
I think there would be hesitation regardless, because the moment you send in your troops, even if they're unarmed, there's a risk that, the Russians shell a village where your guys are helping out, and now you've got 20 to 30 of your guys dead or wounded, and the population in your country hears about it and now demands you take action, and now you end up with, okay, Bulgaria is going to send a volunteer brigade to go fight in Ukraine. How does that affect all of NATO? Because Bulgaria is part of NATO. So it gets really weird. So I think people would be very hesitant about it. I do agree that even if you got buy-in from the Russians, people would be reluctant to send their troops, especially if they're associated with NATO, into Russia or even occupied Ukraine, to be more accurate. But, it's a possibility. And if they're non-NATO aligned, maybe Austria sends somebody, or technically Sweden, who isn't in NATO, or Ireland, or what have you.
So
I'm still not sure if that really accomplishes anything other than muddying the water, so to speak, and making it difficult for everybody to sort out how we're supposed to react to this. I don't think either side is likely to want to not shell the other side's positions on the other side of the river. And if you're doing that, then you're putting whatever aid workers go in peril.
So what are you looking for? what are you trying to see for the direction as to how this is going to pan out over, say, the next 24 to 72 hours?
I think the Ukrainians will do what they can to rescue their people and minimize the damage to their side. I think the Russians don't really give a damn. And, if a bunch of civilians on their side of the river drowned, oh, well, they were Ukrainian people, so why do we care? That's how I see it's going to play out. And I don't think it's going to go much beyond that. The real big question to my mind that we have to wait and see is what happens with the power plant. And that I'm going from my military perspective is that when you know that there is a possibility that something like this might happen, one would think that the personnel manning that plant had contingencies in place to immediately shut down the plant and do everything they could to, prevent a disaster. But, it's, as I said earlier, it's on the Russian side of the river. How much are the Russians going to interfere with anything of that sort? Do they, in fact, want a nuclear disaster to occur? I wouldn't put it past them. I mean, they know if NATO has told them point blank, if you use nukes in Ukraine, we're coming for you. But this isn't using a nuke in Ukraine.
Yeah. Well, we know they've actually deliberately interfered with the normal and safe operations of the plant before. They've cut the power to the plant. They've cut the ability to use backup generators when they cut the power to the plant. They've cut the maintenance to the plant. So if they're trying to keep that plant operating safely, they're hiding it very well. All right. So, and any, God, I hesitate to ask but any expectation that the UN, I assume the UN is going to weigh in. I assume it's going to be meaningless. Is there anything that you're expecting that they may or may not be able to? Yeah.
I'm sorry. I hate to say it because I still try to have some respect for what the UN allegedly tries to do, and I do. I mean, it's a noble idea, but it's a powerless organization, particularly when Russia's on the Security Council as a permanent member. So anything the UN votes to do, they can veto.
Yep.
So, it's one of those situations where, to be honest, the UN as a political body does not evolve with the times. It becomes obsolete and needs to be flushed. And, the UN is kind of past its due date, I think. I don't mean we should get rid of it. I think we should overhaul it, fix it, bring it up to date with the modern world, find some way to say, okay, permanent members either have to, respect or get a proper vote from majority of the members or something to stay on the council. No permanent seats. I don't care how many glowing gophers you got. It ain't. That's not what the Security Council's about.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's probably the cornerstone of the problem there. And he'll gifted 5 in-time memberships. And thank you so much. And I see all sorts of people saying thank you in the live chat. And I know all of those people. So thank you all. That was very generous of you. We really appreciate your support. So with that, I think we've just about covered everything. Thank you, Commander, for joining us. I know it was late notice, but I think you're very much sort of on the same page with us that this was needed some discussion. So we really appreciate you coming and helping us out with that.
No, it was terrorist act. Terrorists smuggled several tens of thousands of pounds of explosive onto the dam to blow it up. Yeah, and our guards didn't see them taking the weeks it takes to rig such demolitions.
Yeah.
A terrorist act.
Which is why I know that the dam was under Russian control. It has been under Russian control, and they've mined yeah. All right. So thank you for that. We're going to have you back on Friday with Operator Starsky to talk about this and everything else that's been going on. My suspicion is it's going to be a lot between now and Friday, 3 p.m. Eastern, so we look forward to that. We'll also have you, President Sunday, myself on for downtime on Thursday. That's at 9:30 Eastern Standard Time. Looking forward to that. That will be on our sister channel, Overtime. So I hope you guys will join us for that. We'll get you all the link. Thank you again to everybody who super chatted and for all of the very generous memberships which you guys gave out. We really appreciate that, and we look forward to seeing you then. In the meantime, my name is Nick Suter. Thank you once again to Commander Lance McMillan, and we will see you all Thursday for downtime and Friday, Operator Starsky, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard. See you then.